Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Mobalytics video. Today we're taking a look at 10 new OP champions, picks and builds in patch 12.3. Before we get started, what new pick are you having success with so far this patch? So let's get straight into it, and in the first spot we've got the new Ahri update. I've already been having a ton of fun and success with the new Ahri, and it actually feels so much better. Ahri feels so potent now in those early 2v2s and dragon fights, and her damage feels pretty nuts, especially when you complete your mythic. The fact that you don't have to rely on her charm anymore to deal enough damage is one thing, but the ultimate charge resets are a godsend. Ahri now has the ability to get stuck into teamfights and search for continuous kills, rather than just setting up camp in a bush and looking for picks. Ahri's whole playstyle has opened up, and it's just made the champion a ton more versatile. So there are a few different build options to go for depending on the game, but the mythic with the highest win rate at the moment is Luden's Tempest. Now that it isn't as important to land your charm, Everfrost isn't quite as prolific, and Luden's extra burst damage and wave clear just feels so damn good. After your mythic item, Sorcerer's Shoes and Shadow Flame both set you up to deal a significant amount of damage, and by this point you should be popping your enemies left, right and centre. Other popular options are items like Horizon Focus, Rabadon's and of course Zhonya's Hourglass. Ahri still does have those issues of being able to keep up with the big scaling mages in the late game, but you can easily destroy the early to mid game so much that those enemy champions never actually get to play the game. Ahri's win rate has soared massively since these changes, so make sure you're not sleeping on this champion. Next up, we just have to talk about the Blade of the Ruined King buff and the main champions who are absolutely loving it. The item has always been one of those items that the second it gets buffed, there are a plethora of champions that are just grinning from ear to ear. The main ones we're going to talk about today are the terrifying trio in that top lane, Aurelia, Jax and Fiora. Aurelia and Jax are pretty obvious abusers of this item, and Fiora is also having a ton of fun with it in a slightly less popular Stride Breaker and Press the Attack build that we covered in a video a few months back. All three of these champions can benefit so much from this item when it's completed, and they just feel so much stronger with it. Aurelia is performing exceptionally well with Blade of the Ruined King and the Shield Bow Rush, and she's definitely got that high win rate back. Jax is still finding his feet with his mythic item after the Divine Sunderer nerfs, but Triforce does seem like it's bouncing back a little bit, and as we mentioned earlier, Fiora is still thriving with that Stride Breaker PTA setup. All three of these top laners are definitely going to cause problems with the new Blade this patch. Next up, we've got Brand in the mid lane, and this champion has not seen so much popularity here for such a long time. Back in the early days of League, Brand mid was a huge thing, and the recent quality of life buffs could encourage people to start playing it again. The reason Brand mid hasn't seen as much success is because he's basically all about his damage. He doesn't have any mobility or utility, and the second he misses his Q, he's as good as dead, especially with no flash. However, Brand mid does bring a ridiculous amount of damage to the table. He has high wave clear, push potential, and probably one of the best 1v2 ultimates in the game. If you get ganked post 6, you easily have a chance to take out both of your targets if you play it optimally. As soon as you have that Lion Drew's Anguish, you deal a stupid amount of damage, both instantaneously and over time. So there are quite a few different rune setups that you can run on Brand mid, but we found the collection of the best Keystone runes was actually pretty unexpected, and it's based around Electrocute. This is actually outperforming Dark Harvest and Arcane Comet in the mid lane, despite Dark Harvest always being so popular in the support role. Then Cheap Shot is great of course for that bonus true damage, which combines well with the 25% increased damage your W does if your target is already ablaze. Eyeball Collection is obviously next, but then Relentless Hunter is the real MVP in this rune set. A lot of people prefer the reduced cooldown on the ultimate, but actually giving Brand a ton of out of combat movement speed makes him so much more difficult to deal with. Not only does it allow him to get in and out and land his poke easier, but it also makes him far more difficult to get hold of. After that, Transcendence works a treat on Brand, especially at level 11 onwards, and Scorch was simply made for it, let's be honest. Overall, Brand mid is a ton of fun and performing better than you'd expect, especially with this rune set, so let us know how you get on with it. Unfortunately, now we're going to have to talk about the absolute nonsense that's been going on in the Summoner's Rift at the moment, and in patch 12.3, it's only getting more popular, the roaming top laners. Now starting off with the most obvious one being Janna, but I've seen Yuumi, Rakan, Rammus and even Kayn all abusing this ridiculous tactic. So you lock in Janna top, you take Smite, and you just roam all game and invade the enemy jungler on repeat with your own jungler. You steal their camps, irritate them and disrupt them, and just make their life living hell whilst also ganking random lanes in the downtime. The best combination people have been abusing this with is with Kindred. Kindred scales stupidly well by collecting camps and farming up to become that ridiculous monster that she is with all those extra range stacks in the late game. Roaming Janna top and Kindred jungle is pretty much impossible to play against, let alone beat in the long run. And when the game descends into chaos because of the sheer amount of cheese running through the jungle, these two can just laugh in the face of it. Not only does the jungler take all of their jungle and the enemy jungle, but they also take the majority of the waves up top too, when they find time. Meaning this basically just works out as a modern day funnel strat. By explaining this OP strategy in this video, we are unfortunately secondhand promoting it, but hopefully you guys have souls and will not join the dark side and play this crazy disgusting tactic. The next pick is all about the new Death Dance and some of the champions who can abuse it. Riot has always had issues balancing this item, and yet again it feels a little bit too powerful already. Death Dance now reduces the damage of both physical and magical damage, and the healing it provides is just insane. Previously when you bought this item you would have a great time against physical damage, but you'd still get one shot by enemy mages. Now you can stagger that damage too, giving you a far greater chance at survival and benefiting from the heal as well. Riven is 100% one of the primary champions who can really put this item to good use, but there are a ton of champions who are loving this change and thriving from it. Yone, Hecarim, Camille and so on. Be sure to get yourself clued up on these matchups, as you'll be seeing a lot of these champions abusing this item in patch 12.3. Now it's time for something a little bit more unusual, Jhin, but in the mid lane. So a small selection of players have been having a ton of success with this recently. A large part of it just comes to how bonkers Jhin is at the moment, and he's been S tier in that bot lane since the start of the season and super popular for even longer. Jhin mid is obviously more risky than playing him in the bot lane. You don't have the protection from your support and you have less control over your vision. However, there are some major pros alongside those obvious cons. Jhin brings a brilliant amount of bullying to this lane. His Q, his auto attacks and his W are all very oppressive, especially in low range matchups, and his ultimate can be used similarly to a Xerath ult to constantly contribute to fights in the river or beyond. If you poke down your enemy mid laner enough, you just simply press R and pop them as they scramble behind the turret in panic. Once you get your Gale Force, you also become so much harder to gank and shut down in general, so working towards this item is crucial. When playing Jhin in the bot lane, you've got a few options with runes, but in the mid lane you without a doubt want to go for fleet footwork. The sustain and mobility is imperative here, so make sure you're running that rune. Now don't get me wrong, this pick is pretty controversial, and if you play it incorrectly, losing an early kill or two and you're probably going to have an awful time. But if you can pull it off, it can be very rewarding and super enjoyable at the same time. Lilia got a buff to her ultimate this patch, and to be honest with you, this champion has been criminally underrated for ages. Lilia has a very unique playstyle which can cause newer players to not quite understand how she works. She's all about stacking her movement speed passive up, weaving in and out of fights with it, and hitting her enemies with her basic abilities on cooldown, making use of that time in between burst windows to burn away at her foes with her itemization. Lilia's ultimate is an incredible tool to win fights and games with though, and this buff increasing its sleep duration to 2 seconds at its first rank is actually huge. Imagine you're in an early dragon fight and you land a 5-man sleep. That's 2 seconds of CC on every single enemy champion, and that's more than enough to win a teamfight. If you combine this ability with other AoE damaging spells, you're going to have a great time, especially with Misfortune, as Lilia's sleep won't even cancel with that one. Lilia is just a brilliant pick to go for at the moment. She's never banned, rarely played, but has a significant impact in most of her games. She can also be played in top and jungle, so it works well for those autofill games when you do need a pocket pick. Fizz is creeping into the meta at the moment, and he's actually got one of the highest win rates across the board. We included him recently in our top solo carry champions video, and there's plenty of reasons why. Fizz ticks so many boxes. He can farm up easily with his W reset, he can clear waves quickly with his E when he needs to, he can push and roam, he can all in pre-6, and he can farm enemies with his ultimate. Not only all of that, but he can snowball so ridiculously hard that there's no chance of recovery from the opposing team. Fizz is also ridiculously hard to shut down. At level 9 when Fizz has maxed his E, it's on such a low cooldown already. Then you factor in his Q from ability 2, and all of the ability haste he's going to build as well, and it just feels like you have such a marginal window to punish him, especially if he bags the Zhonya's. Fizz has always favoured electrocute, it suits him perfectly and it just gives him that edge in trades and all-ins. Now there are definitely some not so nice matchups for Fizz, however, most of these bad matchups are still super skill dependent. As long as you dodge most of that incoming damage with your E, anything is possible. Gwen is absolutely running right now, and if it gets to the late game, the game is simply over. Gwen is a hyper-scaling AP monster capable of genuinely shredding entire teams with her ultimate in those teamfights. Gwen's problem has always been her impact before she scaled, but now with so many bruisers questioning their itemization and their new lack of health, she's having a much easier time. Gwen's relatively low win rate does not depict the strength of this champion. She's highly contested in both high elo solo queue, pro play and competitive games all around the globe, and if you can work out how to get through those difficult matchups, you're always going to come out on top. Riftmaker and Nashor's Tooth have remained untouched and very strong on specific champions, and Gwen spikes super hard when she's picked both of these items up. Make sure you're running Conqueror as well, as its win rate is much higher and it just feels so much better on this champion than Lethal Tempo with its scaling. Gwen is yet another champion that can also be flexed, whether it's top or jungle, you've always got as an option for both roles. Gwen's impact in the jungle won't be crazy high in the early game, but if you power farm and set up those dragon fights, you're going to come out ahead in the long run. Overall, the damage, the healing, the AoE madness all make Gwen a top pick this patch. Finally, Senna support is now fully back in action. She got buffed previously, and then after dominating patch 12.2, Riot reduced her soul drop rate and forced her back into that support role. Senna's ability to become a scaling AD carry monster without even farming is just way too good of an opportunity to pass up on. Senna support does have to be cautious in the early game, especially in certain hard engaging matchups. She's very squishy, and this does mean she can be farmed if ganked on repeat, but if you are wise to this and get through that lane phase even or ahead, she starts ramping up very quickly. AP bot laners are also fairly common this patch, and that works great for Senna. If she's partnered with another AD, it does feel like it's a little bit limiting, basically having 2 AD carries together. However, if you pair her with a mage like a Veigar, or even the old Tahm Kench pairing, it becomes so much harder to deal with her. Senna brings so much to the table. She has harass, pick potential and sustain in lane. She also has a global ultimate to contribute to fights across the entire map, which is exceptionally good in those early dragon fights, and she also has her exceptional scaling and damage. Senna is simply not the kind of champion you can leave unchecked, as if you do, she's going to pew you into a whole new realm. Senna definitely does take a bit of practice with her fragility and her fairly unique way of scaling, but if you can make it work, you will definitely see rewards in solo queue for this patch. That's going to wrap up our 10 new OP champions picks and builds for patch 12.3. We hope you enjoyed this video and do let us know in the comments who you've been having the most success with. I've been your host Vale, and as always, take care.